Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Emergency Home Learning Summit. Ross Wehner is here. Ross, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so tell us what you do. What's your job?
Well, my job is I'm founder of World Leadership School, which is based in Boulder, Colorado, and our mission is to partner with K through 12 schools to reimagine learning and create next generation leaders. So we're all about helping schools become the ultimate foundation for launching students into a life of purpose. And we have traditionally done two things: taking students out into the world on immersion programs around the world and in the United States, and coaching teachers to bring purpose back into learning. And during coronavirus, we have done quite a few new things as well.
It's so interesting to think about that purpose. I had a discussion the other day about college admissions and how the admissions process is designed to find the evidence of engagement, but often people try and mimic that evidence in order to look good for the application process. Do students with purpose have an advantage?
Wow. I mean, yes, I'm working on a book on purpose learning. And over the last 10 years, 13 years since I started World Leadership School, all my career, all my energy has been focused on this question of how can we help students explore, discover, and articulate purpose. And what I have concluded is that purpose is not an abstraction. It is a thing that each child can clarify, that schools can deliberately foster through strategies, that universities and schools can measure. And we can talk about the common application and how they are deliberately fishing for purpose with those prompts. And so, yes, I absolutely believe that purpose is not, in my mind, a skill alongside the other skills that some school systems have been built around, like grit or growth mindset or skills-based learning. I think that purpose is the capstone skill from which all these other things flow. And I think that in a world that is not only accelerating, but also interconnecting as ours is, the future is no longer complex, it's simply unknowable. And if we don't have a sense of purpose to navigate through uncertainty, we're at a severe disadvantage.
Would it be fair to say that schools as an institution in some ways are kind of designed to bypass individual purpose?
Absolutely. I think so. And, we don't have time to go into the whole history of school, but, in 1892, there was schools do, if you follow the work of Larry Cuban, the foremost scholar on the history of school at Stanford, professor emeritus at Stanford now, Larry will say, and I've interviewed him recently, he says, the age-based classroom, in other words, clumping students by age, that has been the most durable construct ever. And, school modifies very, very slowly. But having said that, there are key moments in the history of school. In 1892, this committee of 10, which were 10 white men assembled by the leading industrialists of the day, the Carnegie, the Vanderbilt, JP Morgan, basically paid to have these university presidents come together and standardize high school in the United States in order to create the new workforce for the industrial economy. And they were the ones that made the decision to have 8 50-minute periods separated by bells to divide science into chemistry, biology, physics, to create units which are still to this day called Carnegie credits that go on our transcript to basically measure learning by seat time, right? And now fast forward 130 years, I think we're at another one of these moments where we realize, because of teen stress and positive psychology and neuroscience and so many other things that are happening in our world, that this factory model of education that was hatched 130 years ago is not working. In fact, it's making our children sick. And so now there's this new birthing of a new paradigm, which is roughly, skills-based learning, this idea of shifting from content, the old system, to skills, the new system. But I think that a skills-based system can be just as meaningless as a content-based system unless we actually think about the needs of our learners. And this is, of course, where purpose comes in. And the last thing I'll say about this is, Steve, I think there's a new group of 10 white men who are pouring billions of dollars into skills-based learning. And it's very worrisome to me that they're not thinking about purpose or meaning or the actual needs of students today. And these 10 white men are Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Google, Bill Gates, Reed Hastings of Netflix. I mean, each Elon Musk, who started his own school. So these tech giants, just like the industrialists, just like J.P. Morgan and Vanderbilt in the 1880s, they're pouring billions of dollars to create the next workforce for the tech economy. And my question is, do we really want to create school just for the workforce, or do we actually want to help our children become the best, most alive, purpose-driven humans that they can be, so that they not only are well themselves, but they can contribute and heal our planet? This is more important now than ever. I'll get off my soapbox, but that's how I feel about this moment right now.
You're on the interview program because you have a soapbox.
Okay.
That's why you're here. Okay, so if a student benefits from being purpose-driven,
right,
I'd like you to talk a little bit about how organizations benefit from being purpose-driven, and can families be purpose-driven?
Absolutely. I think that, yes, I think the purpose is, the hard thing about purpose is that, we when we think about purpose learning, right, which is a construct that we're pushing at World Leadership School, which is essentially a reinterpretation, a modern reinterpretation of the ideas of John Dewey. John Dewey was all about head, heart, and hands learning. That has inspired, Waldorf schools still to this day. We are now reinterpreting that as learning as thinking, feeling, and doing. And the idea is that learning in the past was mainly about thinking. In other words, helping students memorize content knowledge and develop key cognitive skills like critical reasoning. But we think learning moving forward has to combine rich forms of thinking with feeling, so emotional regulation, self-awareness, the ability to empathize and understand other perspectives, the ability to understand one's gifts, one's identities. This is where diversity, equity, and inclusion work comes in. And ultimately to understand one's purpose. Why are we here, right? And then the other part of purpose learning is learning as doing, which is connecting to real problems, working with real people, project-based learning, community engagement, global education, et cetera. And the reason I mention purpose learning is that purpose is hard because we always want to solve things with our thinking brain. And purpose is actually something that happens when we connect our thinking brain to our feeling brain, our limbic brain. And it's not only, so purpose is, meaning on the inside that's deeply meaningful and emotional to us. And it's also learning as doing. So it's connecting this inner meaning to an action on the outside. And that's when purpose happens in individuals, in organizations, in families, et cetera. And so, as an example, at World Leadership School, we started World Leadership School, 13 or 14 years ago now, with this mission of reimagining learning and creating next generation leaders. And when I started World Leadership School, I asked my dad for a loan to start the company. And my dad said, I'll give you this money, but honestly, I don't even understand your business concept here. I said, Dad, we just have this mission and we're going to figure it out. And my dad thought we were crazy. I was crazy, but we have followed that mission doggedly. And we student travel and professional learning, and in COVID, our business was turned absolutely upside down. I mean, we lost 85% of our 2020 projected revenue in 45 days. That would have been an absolute death sentence for almost any business. And we fell back on our mission. We thought about what we could do, and we immediately started offering new services to follow that same mission. So online courses, teacher workshops, et cetera. And within weeks, we felt like we were on a strong financial path again. And so it just goes to show you that, purpose is about purpose. That this is what I was saying before, that, that rather than pursue resilience or grit, we need to pursue purpose, and we need to let grit and resilience flow from purpose. So, in our families, the family thing, that is actually, I have a lot of thoughts about parenting, and that's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about families having like a stated sense of purpose. I will say that my wife and I, when we got married, we sort of created, love and adventure was like the values of our marriage, and it's actually engraved on my wedding ring. And so when we, I oftentimes take off my wedding ring, and we remind ourselves, my wife and I remind ourselves of that purpose, why we're together. And it's very powerful, and it's kept us together through all kinds of difficulties.
It seems like there's probably a connection with the Stephen Covey material in, was it 7 Habits of Highly Successful Families? That the mission, like a mission statement for a family.
Absolutely. I didn't know that Stephen Covey had written that book about families. Stephen Covey was one of the pioneers of purpose work for individuals and for organizations. And he's a lineage of, Stephen Covey learned that work from Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, which to me is the most important book I've read personally. The first chapter of that book is really what you need to read. It's 60 pages long. And Viktor Frankl carried on from people before him, the existentialists, and all the way back to Aristotle. So, purpose is a long-standing tradition, and in the history of human thought and practice.
So those who've organized to do learning together, whether it's formal schools or pandemic pods or homeschool groups, it seems like you probably extend this lesson to saying that those who have a culture and a mission, a purpose, are more likely to be able to deal with difficulties like COVID. Has that seemed to be true for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, so the person that's probably done the best work on organizational purpose is Simon Sinek. He's written a number of excellent books and does coaching and consulting work with huge Fortune 50 companies. And one of the things that Simon says, just funny to say Simon says, but one of the things that he says is that you have to start with the why. That's one of his books. And so the idea there is, Simon points out in his famous TED talk about leadership, he compares companies that start with what he calls the what versus companies that start with the why, right? We see this in schools all the time. Okay. So his example is he takes Ford Motor Company and compares it to Apple. So Ford Motor Company starts out with, we make cars, they drive really fast, they have electric windows, great air conditioning systems, right? They're describing they're trying to sell you what they do, right? Apple, on the other hand, takes a whole different approach. We exist to help you think differently and to bring out your creative potential, right? That is such a more powerful platform for business for Apple. And, we happen to make iPhones and laptops and other things. Would you like to buy one, right? And so that platform allows Apple to move into multiple. The what for them is not nearly as important as the why. And if you start thinking about this, you think about the work that Elon Musk has done, a very purpose-driven entrepreneur, regardless of what you think of him, his company, it's like Tesla is like pushing the boundaries of like what's possible, right? And that's their whole mission, is to just do extravagant new things, right? And so with schools, we see this, that we're in a major point for the history of school. I think that charter schools and the homeschooling movement is going to explode. Online learning is going to explode. And frankly, lots of private schools are going to go out of business. And the ones I think that are going to go out of business are the schools that have always focused on the what, right? That are very transactional. And essentially you can think of, like, in New York City, the Upper West Side, $55,000 a year tuition. And parents are like, if my kid goes to this school, they will probably go to Harvard, right? Like, they are basically buying a path to college, right? And now there's other schools that have a whole different approach, that are like, I'm thinking of a school here in Denver, St. Mary's Academy, which was founded by nuns who took the Santa Fe Trail, and they started this school in the 1860s here in Colorado. They are like change makers. They are brave women who change the world, right? That's the whole mission, the whole identity of the school. And everyone in that school shares that vision and mission. And that's why St. Mary's Academy is really going to rock it in the next 10, 15, 20 years, which is going to be a crazy ride for schools, I think.
Okay, so I'm a student or a parent. I'm
Yeah.
midway through high school. COVID hits. I'm sitting in front of a screen for 7 hours a day. All of my sort of sense of opportunity is shifting. The extracurriculars I wanted to do, the things I wanted to study. The school is replying in very bureaucratic ways. What do I do?
Well, I think it's most schools are now in survival mode. And so they are just buckling down. And I was just speaking to a school in New York that was in person, now is hybrid and high flex. And, this is, all these changes are very, very difficult for schools to manage. And I think we need to have a lot of compassion and patience with our schools right now. The teachers are more stressed out than they have ever been. This is the largest disruption to school in the history of our planet. And teachers have been frontline workers in this pandemic. I consider teachers and administrators absolute heroes right now. But having said that, I do think that this spring, coronavirus, Black Lives Matter, the elections has been this huge wave that has washed over us in 2020. And each of us have had a different journey, for sure. Some have experienced trauma, personal loss, disconnection, isolation. Others have even thrived. But it's been a different journey for everyone. But there's just been this huge wave. And at some point, and with the vaccine coming, maybe it's now, the waters are going to start to recede. And for purpose-driven schools, the question, and this is where, if you're a parent or student, you should be watching your school this spring and this summer, because there's a lot of stuff floating around in the water. And there's a lot of possibility. People are very flexible and responsive now. And the question is, as the waters recede, what as schools are we going to grab onto? What are these changes that we're going to grab onto and now make permanent features of our school? And I think purpose-driven schools are going to be able to do this, because we can't go back to the same thing, right? We have to use this disruption to become better in the future. So I think my message is, be patient right now, but when the waters recede, watch how your school responds. Watch how your school takes advantage of this moment, because there's a personal crisis, but there's also a huge window for innovation for schools that are able to seize it. And the purpose-driven schools will be able to do that.
That would worry me a little as a parent, because then I'm waiting. And what if my school doesn't figure it out? My child has lost a year or a year and a half of some forward momentum within the system. So is there a way for a student to become purpose-driven regardless of the circumstance?
Yeah, absolutely. So as an example, my two kiddos are in public school and they are in remote learning all the time. Each of them has one day a week where they go to school. And my son in particular is in a very large high school with 2,000 kids, and he has very few classes because they have this new block schedule, and it's very imbalanced. So, this fall he's got almost no classes, and in the spring he's going to have a huge load. So it's very disappointing to me. So it makes our work as parents even more important right now. And, one of the things that Steve and I have been talking about is that, when it comes to parenting, there's a lot of confusion right now. There was this whole intensive parenting movement, and there's been a backlash against helicopter parenting, snowplow parenting, et cetera. And I do agree with the idea that parents should back off and allow children to make mistakes and fail. But I think the focus but I think that, as we back off a little bit and allow our students to make some mistakes, we also need to move forward in a new way. And I call this purpose parenting. And so purpose parenting is this idea that and all parents do this subconsciously, but I'm talking about a more like deliberate approach. So purpose parenting is this idea that you watch your child very, very closely to see how they spend their time, what their gifts are, and you deliberately, we know from the research that if your child becomes purpose driven, it's not going to be because of you necessarily. It'll be because you managed opportunities in such a way that you put opportunities in the path of that student that aligned with what they love to do. And in particular, the research shows that when the most important factor in purpose-driven kids is the mentors that the parents are able to find them. So I am constantly on the lookout for guitar teachers, soccer coaches, Boy Scouts, Scoutmasters, rabbis, priests, mentors. Our children need mentors now more than ever. And so your job as a parent is, yes, to set an example of purpose-driven learning, of meaning on the inside connected to action on the outside. We can talk about how simple purpose can be. So yes, your job is to role model, but more than anything, your job is to be the what I call the spark manager, to see those sparks and attach those sparks to mentors in your child's life. And so that's what I've been trying to do with my kids. And I can't say I've been 100% successful, but I've certainly been working at it pretty hard.
There's been an interesting thread in the interviews of the role of the non-judgmental adult, someone who is in a position to help the student, but where there isn't the emotional sense of responsibility or the dynamic that exists between parents and kids. So the idea of an external mentor makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And then helping them to find that person. So what was your school story growing up?
Well, I was a classic public school kid. I went through high school, went through a large 2,000 person high school. I don't remember, we talk about purpose learning. My school was all learning is thinking. So it was all AP tests and, reading and content. And I don't remember, not even once in my high school, working on a real problem with learning as doing. Like we never did project-based learning, right? Nor do I remember any learning as feeling. So any work about, who was I, how was I different, what were my identities, what were the things I loved to do, what were my emotions? I mean, my school was completely learning as thinking. Yet I learned to play the game really well. I went on to the University of Virginia, and I just kept playing the game. And I was on Dean's List and Phi Beta Kappa. I was an excellent student at getting good grades. And when I graduated college, I was interested in reporting, newspaper reporting, and so I'd been editor of a newspaper in college, and then I became a journalist, full-time journalist, at 20 years old or 21 years old in Washington, D.C., and I did that for a year. And one morning I woke up and I felt this sense of like nausea, dread. It was just like, I felt literally like my life was elsewhere, like I was leading someone else's life. And I began to realize in the next couple of months that I had been playing this game that had been given to me by someone else. I had been chasing someone else's goals and someone else's priorities. And it was the beginning of me waking up. And after a month or two, I decided that I was going to quit my job working at the high-tech newspaper in Washington, D.C., which I hated. And I was going to instead go down to South America, learn Spanish, and work as a freelance writer covering the end of the Pinochet regime in Chile, which was a military dictatorship. So I went to my mom and dad and I said, Mom and Dad, I need $800 to buy a plane ticket to Chile. And my dad said, there is no way we are loaning you this money. Do you realize how hard you have worked to get to this point? How successful you have been? If you stay on this path, you could be a reporter at the Washington Post in 5 years. And I said, Dad, I understand that, but I can't do this anymore. I have to I have to embark on I didn't say this, but at the now I realize I had to embark on a life that was actually mine. And that's what I did. I went down to Chile. I worked as a journalist. It was a very, very difficult year. I saw and experienced things that I will never forget. And I ended up staying in Latin America for 6 years working as a journalist. And that changed my life. And that was the moment that I finally stepped into my story, into my purpose. And that has made all the difference ever since. And it makes me so sad to think about students who end up playing that game throughout their 20s, maybe throughout their whole lives, go through maybe all kinds of things they don't have to go through and suffer unhappiness just because our educational system failed to allow them to explore, discover, and articulate their sense of purpose. And so that's what my work in life is all about.
It's fun that you brought your parents into the story twice here. Your awakening was after school when you were in the workforce. Are there adults that you look back and say, I really appreciate the advice or the willingness to listen to me? It made a dramatic difference. And maybe that's your parents, but were there others?
Oh, absolutely. I was involved with Boy Scouts, and there was a Boy Scout, a troop master who was just unbelievable. We didn't really talk that much. He was a Korean War veteran. He didn't really say much, but his model of leadership, his calm and his faith was just very inspiring to me. And there was also a pastor in our church. I was involved in our church youth group who was also very important to me. So, there were some really important mentors. Although I don't think I had I would I think that had my parents been a little more focused on finding mentors, I probably could have gotten involved in other things. But I was certainly successful in latching onto a couple of mentors for sure.
If you could give any advice right now to parents, students, or teachers, what would it be?
Well, I think that we need to realize how difficult this moment is. And this is literally the largest disruption, not only to school, but to life in the history of the modern history. And it's really interesting to think about how this is going to affect things moving forward. But I think we need to take care of ourselves and try to move past the personal crisis. And 2020 has been a train wreck. Like, there's nothing we could have done about it. It's a train wreck, period. But in 21, I do think all of us as individuals and as organizations, we have the power to approach 21 with purpose and intention. And so I encourage all of us, as we take care of ourselves and move into the end of the year, that we think about who we want to be and who we want to become in 21, because there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity, and we can't let ourselves go back to the same, or our families go back to the same, or our organizations go back to the same. Like, we have to move past the current personal crisis into the innovation opportunity. And the stakes are really high, because if you study pandemics, you'll see that pandemics are always pivotal moments in world history. So the pandemic that happened in 1350, which destroyed a third of Europe's population, that pandemic, historians believe that was one of the major causing forces of the Renaissance, which happened 50 years later in Italy and then spread across all of Europe. The 1918 pandemic, which killed 200 million people around the world, historians in the same way believe that pandemic actually led to the rise of nationalism, and in particular, the Nazis in World War II. So what will this pandemic lead to? And I think it's up to us. I think it's up to us to decide where this goes.